Mo Money, Mo non-consensual freak-off parties where the unwilling participants were often beaten and given drugs and IVs to continue in these marathon sessions, and 1,000 Mo bottles of baby oil and lubricant to facilitate these crazy bacchanalia. Yeah, these allegations are bad. Yeah, 12 months ago, Mayor Eric Adams gave Diddy the key to New York City.
The bad boy of entertainment is getting the key to the city from the bad boy of politics.
Well, apparently Mayor Adams finally got something right, because Sean Combs has apparently been a very bad person.
Sean Combs stood in Times Square and was handed a key to New York City. Today, he's been indicted and will face justice in the Southern District of New York.
After months of speculation, the Department of Justice has charged Combs with sex trafficking, racketeering, and interstate prostitution. Yes, Sean Combs, aka Puff Daddy or P. Diddy, may be facing up to life imprisonment for his alleged crimes. Now, our last video on Combs detailed the reasons why federal agents from Homeland Security joined with local law enforcement to raid his Los Angeles and Miami properties in what turned out to be a sex trafficking investigation. The evidence seized in those raids forms the basis of this indictment. Assistant U.S. Attorney Damian Williams said,
"The indictment alleges that between at least 2008 and the present, Combs abused, threatened, and coerced victims to fulfill his sexual desires, protect his reputation, and conceal his conduct."
The indictment comes on the heels of several people filing lawsuits against Combs for allegedly beating, drugging, and forcing women to perform sex acts, which were sometimes recorded. Combs denied the allegations, but as more lawsuits were filed, evidence started to leak out. CNN obtained a 2016 hotel surveillance video showing Combs violently grabbing, shoving, dragging, and kicking his then-girlfriend Cassie Ventura down the hall. Combs then apologized.
"My behavior on that video is inexcusable. I take full responsibility for my actions in that video. I'm disgusted. I was disgusted then when I did it. I'm disgusted now. I went and I sought out professional help. I had to go into therapy and go into rehab."
Sure, he's sorry now, but the Cassie video seemed to be the tipping point. More women and men came forward with allegations, former employees said they witnessed abuse, and then the FBI raided the properties. The Department of Justice said the video of Combs assaulting Cassie was part of a pattern of conduct where Combs forced women to participate in sex acts with commercial sex workers. The indictment also says Combs went to great lengths to cover up his crimes. For example, quote, when a member of the hotel security staff intervened to help Cassie, Combs attempted to bribe the staff member to ensure silence. And all that brought us to this moment. Combs was arrested on several counts: racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. Now, of course, as always, these are only allegations. They have not yet been proven, and Combs maintains that he is not guilty and the government still needs to prove its case in a court of law. But the first count is for RICO conspiracy. Now, we've covered the basics of RICO charges before in many videos about Donald Trump and Young Thug. RICO refers to the Federal Racketeering, Influence, and Corrupt Organizations Act, which is codified in 18 U.S.C. 1961 through 1968. RICO is the federal law that was originally designed to combat organized crime. It allows for both criminal and civil actions against individuals or organizations engaged in a pattern of racketeering activity. Racketeering can include a range of criminal acts such as fraud, bribery, money laundering, drug trafficking, sex trafficking, and more. Then to prove a RICO violation, the prosecutor must first show that the defendants had an enterprise, and an enterprise is any group of people associated with each other for a common purpose. Second, there needs to be a pattern of racketeering activity, which means at least 2 acts of racketeering within a 10-year period. These are known as predicate acts. And third, there has to be a connection between the defendant and the management of the enterprise through the illegal activities. And passing the RICO statute wasn't so much about being tougher on any individual crime, but about being able to prosecute crimes that were often hard to prosecute. And the indictment says that, quote, the Combs enterprise consisted of Sean Combs, aka Puff Daddy, aka P. Diddy, aka Diddy, aka PD, aka Love, the defendant, entities within the Combs business, including but not limited to Bad Boy Entertainment, Combs Enterprises, and Combs Global, individuals employed by and associated with the Combs business, and others known and unknown. The indictment claims the purpose of the enterprise was operating a global business in the media entertainment, and as part of that goal, the enterprise devoted itself preserving, protecting, promoting, and enhancing the power, reputation, and brand of Sean Combs. The indictment says Combs demanded, quote, absolute loyalty, and the people involved in the enterprise sought to enrich themselves, and Combs rewarded, quote, those who demonstrated loyalty to Combs and willingness to conceal his crimes.
The road to the bag is definitely tied to your team and the company that you keep. If you are surrounding yourself with different energies that's not on the same wavelength as you, if they not praying for you, inspiring you, supporting you, or showing you a better way,
hello,
Remove them immediately.
As to the third element, according to the government, Combs was the leader of the enterprise and he directed his associates to, quote, lure female victims into his orbit, often under the pretense of a romantic relationship. Combs then used force, threats of force, and coercion to cause victims to engage in extended sex acts with male commercial sex workers that Combs referred to as, among other things, freak-offs. Now, these next allegations are pretty graphic, so you might want to skip ahead to this time code if it might upset you. Now, Combs apparently recorded these freak-off sessions. The indictment says the freak-offs sometimes lasted for several days in a row. Quote, during freak-offs, Combs distributed a variety of controlled substances to victims, in part to keep the victims obedient and compliant. Sometimes unbeknownst to the victims, Combs kept video he filmed of victims engaging in sex acts with commercial sex workers. After freak-offs, Combs and the victims typically received IV fluids to recover from the physical exertion and drug use. And to pull this off, Combs needed the cooperation of dozens of people. And the indictment says just about everyone in his orbit was in on it. Quote, supervisors, security staff, household staff, personal assistants, and other Combs business employees. These employees were responsible for the logistics like booking hotel rooms, setting up lighting, stocking the rooms with lubricant and linens, arranging travel for the victims, and delivering IVs and cash. Now you're probably wondering whether these people could face charges for participating in these events. Well, hold that thought because we'll get there. But during the freak-offs, the victims were subjected to serious physical abuse, including punching, kicking, dragging, and having objects thrown at them. At times, their injuries took weeks to heal. And Combs maintained control over the victims by, quote, physical violence, promises of career opportunities, granting and threatening to withhold financial support, and by other coercive means, including tracking their whereabouts, dictating the victim's appearance, monitoring their medical records, controlling their housing, and supplying them with controlled substances. When the FBI raided Combs' Florida and California properties, they seized various freak-off supplies, including narcotics, and more than 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricant. Now, the predicate offense is the illegal activity that is the foundation or the first crime in the chain of another crime. The Combs indictment lists dozens of state and federal crimes that were cited as foundations for the RICO conspiracy charge. Quote, members and associates of the Combs enterprise engaged in and attempted to engage in, among other activities, sex trafficking, forced labor, interstate transportation for purposes of prostitution, coercion and enticement to engage in prostitution, narcotics offenses, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. The arson allegation stands out because that probably involved Kid Cudi. Although the indictment does not include specifics about the arson, for more than a decade there was a rumor that Diddy put a car bomb in Kid Cudi's car because he was angry that Cudi had been texting Cassie Ventura. Reporter Gavin Godfrey even tweeted about the rumor way back in 2014. In 2023, Cassie alleged that, quote, in February 2012, during Paris Fashion Week, Mr. Combs told Ms. Ventura that he was going to blow up Kid Cudi's car and that he wanted to ensure that Kid Cudi was home with his friends when it happened. Around that time, Kid Cudi's car exploded in his driveway. And after the Ventura lawsuit became public, Cudi confirmed that the rumor was true. And Combs is accused of possession with intent to distribute narcotics, including benzos, ketamine, cocaine, meth, and GHB, which is known as a date rape drug. And then there are possible gun crimes. The FBI seized 3 AR-15s with defaced serial numbers, quote, in or about March 2024, during searches of Combs' residence in Miami, Florida, and Los Angeles, California, law enforcement seized firearms and ammunition, including 3 AR-15s with defaced serial numbers, as well as a drum magazine. Now, penalties for a RICO conspiracy include up to 20 years in federal prison, but Combs could face an even longer term due to the underlying predicate crimes, sex trafficking and prostitution, among others. The government is seeking forfeiture of any assets or property derived from or involved in the criminal enterprise. But that raises the question, why RICO at all? There's lots of illegal stuff that's illegal on its own here. Well, the obvious answer is probably the statute of limitations. A lot of the alleged conduct took place decades ago, where the statute of limitations has passed. So while the prosecutors couldn't charge it as a crime straight up, they can use it as a predicate act as part of a RICO enterprise. Now, obviously, if you're accused of leading a RICO enterprise, you'll want a good lawyer. But if you want a great lawyer, my law firm, the Eagle team, can help. If you've gotten into a car crash, suffered a data breach, especially if you got one of those data breach letters saying your social security number was leaked, or dealing with workers' comp or social security issues, we can represent you or help find you the right attorney. Because it's so important to talk to a lawyer right away so you can maximize your recovery and find out what your options are. So just click on the link in the description or call the phone number that's on screen right now for a free consultation with my team. Because you don't just need a legal team, you need the Eagle team. So click below. Now, 18 U.S.C. 1591 defines sex trafficking as inducing a person to engage in a commercial sex act through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. And a commercial sex act is defined as, quote, any sex act on account of which anything of value is given or received by any person. And a person commits coercion by threatening serious harm or physical restraint or convincing a person that failure to perform an act would result in serious harm or restraint, or by threatening to abuse the law or legal process. The indictment against Combs alleges that he, quote, recruited, enticed, harbored, transported, and maintained a person known as Victim 1 and willfully caused her to engage in commercial sex acts, knowing and in reckless disregard of the fact that Victim 1 was engaging in commercial sex acts as a result of force, fraud, or coercion. People often think of human or sex trafficking as someone being snatched off the street and sold into slavery, but the more common scenario is exactly something like this, where a vulnerable victim is recruited by a powerful person, promising something of value, like housing, money, relationship, drugs, or career opportunities. The women who sued Combs described this pattern. For example, in 2023, a Jane Doe filed a lawsuit against Combs, alleging men working for Combs met her at a nightclub in Detroit, promised to introduce her to Combs, and they allegedly escorted her to a private jet and flew her to a recording studio in New Jersey, where she met with Combs. She claims that they plied her with drugs and alcohol and then gang raped her. And once a trafficker gains the victim's trust, they often isolate them from friends, family, and support networks. By making the victim feel dependent on them, they limit the victim's options to leave or seek help. Cassie Ventura's lawsuit described this scenario. She met Combs when she was 19 and he was 37. Quote, within months, in February 2006, Miss Ventura signed a 10-album deal with Mr. Combs' record label.
I wanted, Cassie to, everybody to meet Cassie. Y'all know that's Cassie. And hear the story directly from Miles.
Once she was financially dependent on Combs, he then, quote, asserted complete control over Miss Ventura's personal and professional life. Ventura alleged that she was trapped by Mr. Combs in a cycle of abuse, violence, and sex trafficking. This indictment doesn't name the victims, but it does say that Combs engaged in this sort of pattern of abuse in that he manipulated women to participate in highly orchestrated performances of sexual activity with male commercial sex workers. Combs and his helpers, quote, ensured participation from the women by, among other things, obtaining and distributing narcotics to them, controlling their careers, leveraging his financial support and threatening to cut off the same, and using intimidation and violence. To ensure the victim's silence, Combs allegedly threatened their careers and livelihoods. He also, quote, used these sensitive, embarrassing, and incriminating recordings that he made during freak-offs as collateral to ensure the continued obedience and silence of the victims. And if found guilty of sex trafficking, Combs faces a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 to 15 years, depending on the circumstances and how the federal sentencing guidelines apply. Now, the federal crime of transportation to engage in prostitution is governed by 18 U.S.C. 2421, which is part of the Mann Act. And as we've covered before, the Mann Act was born during the white slavery hysteria of the early 20th century. The law criminalizes the transportation of individuals across state lines for the purpose of engaging in prostitution or other illegal activities. And famous people prosecuted under the Mann Act, often under extremely dubious circumstances historically, include Jack Johnson, the boxer, actor Charlie Chaplin, singer Chuck Berry, architect Frank Lloyd Wright, and former New York Governor Eliot Spitzer. Yeah, so historically the Mann Act was used to arrest black entertainers while driving their girlfriends across state lines. It doesn't have a great history. The indictment states that Combs knowingly transported an individual in interstate and foreign commerce with the intent that the individual engage in prostitution and attempted, aided, and abetted, and willfully caused the same. To wit, Combs transported, aided, and abetted, and willfully caused the transportation of female victims and commercial sex workers in interstate and foreign commerce on multiple occasions with the intent that they engage in prostitution. Violating Section 2421 can result in severe penalties, including imprisonment for up to 10 years. And if minors were involved, which is not part of this indictment but has been a rumor in the past, or if there are aggravating factors like coercion or violence, the penalties can be significantly enhanced under other sections of the Mann Act or related trafficking statutes. So what about all of those other people who allegedly helped Combs abuse women for decades? Well, Combs' former bodyguard, Roger Bonds, appeared on several talk shows to describe all the violence that he witnessed.
I remember making it a band when he threw a chair at Lorianne Gibson.
Throwing the phone,
the chair,
throwing papers, and
she quit after that. She was like, I'm not there. She came back some years later, but even then, guess what? We looked at it like it was okay. I didn't see nobody say nothing about domestic violence when you created this monster because you just seen him throw a chair at a person. TV. But at that time, right, we ain't look at it like, oh, he has a problem. Yeah, I knew it. You know what I'm saying?
So Bonds raises a good point about people knowing what was happening and failing to intervene. Initially, there was skepticism about the Combs allegations because there were apparently lots and lots of witnesses to his conduct. But the indictment claims that Combs and his team threatened and intimidated witnesses to keep them from talking. Quote, members and associates of the Combs enterprise, including Combs' security personnel, at times carried firearms. On more than one occasion, Combs himself carried or brandished firearms to intimidate and threaten others, including victims of and witnesses to his abuse. And here's a moment Bonds was talking about when Combs threw the chair at Gibson.
Turn the cameras off. You disrespectful.
You ain't in your corner.
So the screen went black for a few seconds, there was a loud noise, and then everyone in the studio looked shocked, and Combs continued to berate Gibson. And lots of people witnessed this, and the full video might be even more damning. Lori Ann Gibson filed a police report, and sources close to Combs said that the argument was just for TV and that Gibson overreacted. But the police evidently bought the story, and presumably they didn't get the unedited video from MTV. And the NYPD did not charge anyone. And that's one of the things that makes this case potentially so galling, is that women reported Combs to the police, and nobody really started talking until women started filing lawsuits. But it's worth remembering that the only reason survivors were able to file lawsuits against Combs was because of a new law in New York. In 2022, New York passed the Adult Survivors Act, which gave victims a one-year window from November 24, 2022 to November 4, 2023 to sue their alleged assailants, even if the statute of limitations had expired. And in this case, the law seems to have worked exactly as intended, because once Cassie Ventura came forward, the floodgates opened. But AUSA Williams issued a warning to other Combs associates.
Second, we are not done. This investigation is ongoing, and I encourage anyone with information about this case to come forward and to do it quickly.
In other words, if you witness any criminal activity or participation in it, it's better to make a deal with the government right now before it's too late and you get charged. Because apparently dozens of people helped Combs commit these crimes. Now, some people might already be cooperating with the government, but more people could still be charged. And if you look at everything Roger Bonds is saying, for example, he might have criminal liability. Here he is telling Piers Morgan he witnessed violence against women and never did anything about it.
How many times did you personally witness him be violent towards women?
Around 4 or 5 times.
And was that all with Cassie, or was it Cassie and other women?
I seen him with Cassie, and I seen him with Kim Porter, his kid's mother.
Right, who's now sadly no longer with us. But what did you see him do?
I've seen him get physical. I've seen him get really physical, grab him up. It was one time that Cassie mentioned inside her lawsuit where she said she had to go over to the London hotel. I was the one that was checking on her every day at the London hotel. You know what I'm saying? So I know that to be true. I seen him get into some rustling and punching matches.
And there is a federal crime called misprision of felony, which is defined in 18 U.S.C. Section 4. Quote, whoever having knowledge of the actual commission of a felony cognizable by a court of the United States conceals and does not as soon as possible make known the same to some judge or other person in civil or military authority under the United States shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 3 years or both. So if a person has knowledge of a felony and conceals it and doesn't report it to the authorities, that person has committed a crime. Now, prosecutors don't charge people under the statute very often, but the indictment claims other people helped conceal the crimes. Quote, on phone calls, Combs and other members and associates of the enterprise, among other things, provided these victims and witnesses with a false narrative of events in an effort to conceal Combs' crimes. Combs caused these calls to be recorded on at least 2 occasions. Oh, so there are recordings, and the prosecutors have them. Bonds and everyone else on Combs' payroll should probably lawyer up. Now, Combs has pleaded not guilty. He surrendered his passport in April. His family surrendered their passports as part of the proposed bail package, and he also put his private jet up for sale. Now, notwithstanding, the government wanted Combs held in pretrial detention without bail. Combs argued that some of the allegations in the indictment were from many years earlier, when he was younger and more immature, but the AUSA argued that that was irrelevant, as both Jeffrey Epstein and Harvey Weinstein were held without bail based on criminal conduct that was several years old. But Combs' lawyer argued that Combs' case is different from many of those other high-profile trafficking cases because he was not charged with crimes against a minor. He argued, quote, Jeffrey Epstein, children. Keith Rainier, children. We have a substantial bail package. Some family members are here. They love him. A $50 million bond secured by a $48 million piece of property. On August 20th, we paid off the $18 million mortgage. Now, that last detail is pretty interesting because it looks like Combs knew he was being indicted, so in August, he paid off the $18 million mortgage on his Miami home so he could offer the property as collateral for the bond. The home is located on West Star Island, and it was appraised for $48 million. He also offered the equity on his mother's home. Now, the AUSA also had concerns about Combs fleeing the country, but that wasn't the only reason that the government opposed the bond. On September 10th, Dawn Richards of the band Danity Kane filed a lawsuit alleging that Combs sexually and verbally abused her for nearly 10 years. In the suit, she said Kalana Harper witnessed Combs abusing Cassie. Harper denied it, but the AUSA said Combs called her 54 times before she issued a public denial. The government's position was that this was witness intimidation. They argued that Combs has been reaching out to several witnesses and that witnesses told the DOJ they felt intimidated and scared of Combs. The AUSA also pointed out that Combs had weapons in his home and that his alleged criminal conduct was ongoing. They also found drugs in Combs' hotel room during the arrest. Combs' lawyer argued that his client wasn't trying to intimidate any witnesses and that he had lots of reasons to contact them. He also said, quote, "These toxic relationships were mutual. Now he's trying to be better for the rest of his days." The judge said, and I'm paraphrasing here based on the report by Matthew Russell Lee, quote, "There has been significant violence and weapons around, also coercion of witnesses. Even gentle coercion can be effective. The type of behavior we're talking about happens behind closed doors. I thank your family members for coming, but I cannot release him." You can find Matthew Russell Lee at theinnercitypress.com. His reports on the happenings in the Southern District of New York have been indispensable for this case and lots of others. Now, Combs appealed the denial of bail, and a hearing was set for September 18th. And on appeal, Combs updated his bail package to address the trial judge's concerns that he was a flight risk and posed a danger to the community. Combs proposed that he would imprison himself inside of his Star Island compound without visitors, quote, "except for family, property caretakers, and friends who are not considered to be co-conspirators." The problem with this is that it's hard to say which of his friends and employees wouldn't be considered a co-conspirator at this point. He offered to use private security, but several courts have already rejected that in other cases. Combs' lawyer said, quote, "He's never run from a challenge and he will not run from this one. Instead, he takes these challenges head on. He moves towards them confidently and with the assurance that right is on his side."
Oh! I'm a savage! Whatever I want, I'm going to get! Whatever I want, I have to get!
Unsurprisingly, the government took a different view of Combs' history and personal characteristics. Quote, "The defendant's years-long use of force and coercion speaks directly to dangerousness." And the government confirmed that there is, in fact, more than one victim. Quote, "To be clear, despite the indictment naming only one victim in count 2, this case is not about just one victim. The government's evidence to date, including the defendant's own communications, demonstrates that the defendant has used force and coercion against multiple victims." Combs argued that the only reason he had recently been speaking with witnesses is because he didn't know he was supposed to stop communicating with them. The prosecutors, not surprisingly, called BS. Quote, "The defendant has been aware of the government's investigation of this case since at least in or about January 2024, and even earlier, directly following the filing of a civil lawsuit in November 2023. The defendant was aware of the potential for criminal charges. Nevertheless, since that time, the defendant has continued his long-standing pattern of engaging in obstructive conduct." And the government said Combs has been contacting grand jury witnesses. Quote, "The fact is, the defendant has personally and repeatedly contacted multiple witnesses, including at least one he himself knew was a grand jury witness. The defendant contacted these witnesses, including at least one whom he had not been in contact with for years after they were served and leading up to the date that they were required to appear before the grand jury." And the government also had harsh words for Combs' lawyer. Quote, "Just yesterday during the bail argument and a subsequent appearance on CNN, defense counsel impugned the allegations made by a statutory victim, challenging the motivation and timing of her claims. In addition to being factually inaccurate, this sort of attack comes close to the limits set forth in Local Crime Rule 23.1. It also can be expected to intimidate other witnesses who may feel tremendous pressure not to go up against the defendant. Local Rule 23.1 prohibits attorneys from publicly challenging the credibility of prospective witnesses." The government said the defense counsel's commentary emphasized the huge power imbalance between his client and the victims and witnesses. So not surprisingly, the judge denied bail. He said that the Ventura, quote, "video is quite disturbing. He was concerned that Combs might try to contact witnesses through coded messages, and Judge Carter said that there was an acute risk of witness tampering and that Combs was still a danger to the community." So Combs was sent to the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, which has been plagued by horrific conditions and confinement. Jeffrey Epstein took his own life at MDC in 2019. And the Bureau of Prisons put Combs on procedural suicide watch, a precautionary status because he's a high-profile inmate. And now all sorts of new allegations about Combs are surfacing in the media. A short memoir allegedly written by Kim Porter was released just days before Diddy's arrest. The music producer who published the book claims that Porter gave, quote, "her close friends a flash drive with manuscript on it before her death." And the book became an instant bestseller. The book claims that Combs forced himself on minors and was responsible for 3 murders. Though of course these allegations are not corroborated, and some of Porter's friends doubt she had anything to do with the manuscript. And it may be unrelated, but many high-profile celebrities in Combs' orbit have been deleting their presence on social media. So we probably haven't heard the last of the fallout. And as for defenses based on what happened at the bail hearing, it looks like Combs is going to argue that the sexual encounters were consensual, and consent is a complete defense to all the sex trafficking charges under Section 1591, unless the victims are minors, which is not alleged here yet, though we might see a superseding indictment at some point. And for the Mann Act charge, Combs is accused of paying for male sex workers to travel across state lines to have sex with the alleged victims. Now, consent is not a defense to the Mann Act charge. To get a conviction there, the DOJ only needs to prove that Combs paid male sex workers and then they crossed state lines, regardless of whether the alleged victims consented. So we're definitely going to need a lot of coffee to watch all the dominoes fall, which we can get with today's sponsor, Trade Coffee. Because Trade is the easiest way to experience amazing specialty coffee at home, and frankly, it's the highlight of my day. Simply pick whatever style you'd like, whether you'd like a specific roast level, cold brew, espresso, you name it, and Trade will have the top roasters from around the country deliver fresh coffee, whole bean or brown, right to your door. It's really that simple. And if you want to be adventurous, Trade is an easy way to experience small batch specialty coffees and support small businesses. It's great to get a coffee every week or gift a coffee subscription to a friend or loved one. All you have to do is choose how often you want to receive your beans, and then you can personalize the rest. Now, I have very specific tastes in coffee. I basically want something that tastes like hot chocolate and pairs well with milk, and Trade was able to find me a perfect bean. And of course, you claim you want a tea-like natural process light roast, but really you want a dark roast that tastes like chocolate, and you can load it up with half and half. But either way, Trade has you covered. Now, people are saying that fall is here, but it's still in the upper 80s here in DC, so I'm drinking my coffee ice cold. And Trade has me covered with a rotating variety of the best iced and cold brew coffees to make at home, curated by their team of coffee experts. I actually got this coffee called Cold Front, which I was supposed to record the sponsorship with a full bag. But it turns out that it was way too good because there's basically nothing left. But if you already know what you like, they probably already have your roaster in stock at a great price. You can choose whole beans or your preferred grind, and your coffee is roasted to order, so it's coming to you really fresh. Way fresher than some supermarket coffee that's been sitting on the shelf for a week. So from hot or iced or dark roast to decafs or espressos to cold brew, Trade has it all. And of course, coffee from Trade also makes a great gift. You can't go wrong with good coffee. And Trade is so confident that you'll love their experience, they're offering their first bag free when you sign up for a subscription. It's a great opportunity to spice up your morning routine and try some delicious coffee. So get your first bag free by clicking on the link below and subscribing. After that, click on this link over here for more Legal Eagle, or I'll see you in court.